Welcome to Detailed, an original podcast by ARCHITECTUREFIRM. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I am Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Danny MacNelly and Adam Ruffin, both partners at, now listen to this, at ARCHITECTUREFIRM. I love that name, ARCHITECTUREFIRM, a collaboration of architects and designers in Brooklyn, New York, and Richmond, Virginia. Led by Danny MacNelly, Katie MacNelly, and Adam Ruffin, they specialize in hospitality, residential, and contemporary art spaces. They approach architecture in a way that is clear in its process and outcome, economical in both means and gestures, and optimistic in its vision of a better future. Danny MacNelly received a Bachelor of Arts in both physics and philosophy from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill before receiving a master's in architecture from the University of Virginia School of Architecture in 2002. A sampling of his hospitality work includes the renovations at the Carolina Inn in Chapel Hill, the Grove Park Inn in Asheville, and the Homestead in Hot Springs, Virginia, as well as a new hotel and new hotel brand at Quirk Hotel in Richmond. Another great name. Danny joined ARCHITECTUREFIRM as a partner in 2015 and has managed the growth of the office with projects for Quirk Hotel in Charlottesville, Arts and Letters Creative Company in Richmond, Common House Richmond, and numerous single and multifamily projects across the Mid-Atlantic region. He is a licensed architect in the state of Virginia and is a LEED accredited professional in building construction and design. LEED AP BD+C. Adam Ruffin studied architecture at the Georgia Institute of Technology and the University of Virginia, receiving a Master of Architecture in 2002. As one of the longest tenured members at Thomas Pfeiffer and Partners, rising to the role of Associate Director, he managed and developed some of the firm's most important cultural and residential projects. Adam joined ARCHITECTUREFIRM in 2017 and manages the Brooklyn office, overseeing projects at the Corning Museum of Glass, the Museum of Ice Cream. Does that sound awesome or what? The Museum of Ice Cream. Multifamily projects in Washington, D.C. and Virginia, and private residences in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Montauk. Adam is also a member of the Dean's Advisory Board at the University of Virginia School of Architecture, and he is a licensed architect in the states of New York, Georgia, and in Washington, D.C. The project we are going to talk about today is the Arts and Letters Creative Company World Headquarters in Richmond, Virginia. The scope consisted of an extensive renovation to a 20,000 square foot brick complex previously used by the Lucky Strike tobacco power plant. Even before my time, two of the plant's buildings were stitched together while conserving most of the existing walls, windows, skylights, tile, and the concrete slab. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome to Detailed. My guests today are Danny MacNelly and Adam Ruffin, both partners at, I'm going to say it right now, I love the name of this firm. I love the name of this firm. They're both partners at ARCHITECTUREFIRM. That's the name of the firm, ARCHITECTUREFIRM, in Richmond, Virginia, and Brooklyn, New York. Danny and Adam, welcome to Detailed. How are you today?
Doing great. It's a beautiful day for it.
Well, maybe where you're at. It's pouring, Portland, Oregon. It's literally raining cats
Never
and dogs.
Beautiful day for it.
Oh, we get lots of beautiful days, but it's not today. I came from Boston. It was like 80 degrees here all week. And the day I come home, it starts raining like crazy. There's something wrong with that. So I like to start the podcast with some crazy icebreaker question I come up with to just get us warmed up a little bit and find out something about you that's a little out of the ordinary or out of architecture. And I'm going to break from tradition today because usually, even if I have more than one guest, you get to answer the same question. But I was intrigued by a couple things. So you guys get separate questions today. My first ones I've ever done that with. Danny, we're going to start with you today. Before earning your master's in architecture, you earned a bachelor's in physics and another one in philosophy, which tells me you have this gigantic brain. So my question for you today to break the ice is, who is your favorite philosopher and why?
Well, thank you. I don't know that I have a big brain. I just took a lot of classes, but I was very inefficient is what it means. But yeah, just I guess looking at philosophy, when I was in school, I had no inkling of architecture. So I think if all the architecture nerds out there would probably say that I would pick Heidegger, because that seems to be the architect's favorite philosopher. But I don't know. I studied more about like philosophy of the brain. I think I was just trying to figure out how the world worked. That's kind of how physics and philosophy maybe come together, or that's how I've post-rationalized it. But probably like Daniel Dennett is a pretty good philosopher of the mind, sort of about just the nature of thought. Bertrand Russell, Nature of Time. I don't know. I don't know. We probably don't want to get too deep into those. That might sidetrack us a little bit.
No, I already in that one sentence have a bunch of homework to go do now. It's like, who are these people? Okay, so Adam, this is, I know, a silly question, but I had to ask. You have worked on all kinds of interesting and notable projects, which we already read in your bio. One that literally jumped off the page to me was the Museum of Ice Cream.
Famous. World famous.
I had no idea there was a museum of ice cream. So I need to know, after that experience, what is your favorite ice cream or ice cream dessert? And was it influenced by that project?
That's interesting. I will say that the Museum of Ice Cream actually has its own line of flavors, and they're all delicious. The Queen Bee maybe being the best and the most unique. But I'm kind of a classicist when it comes to my ice cream flavors. Maybe classicist plus. I like mint chocolate chip. That's probably my favorite flavor in all of the world. Yeah, I know you guys are making faces. I can deal with that. It just does so many things for me that I like done. So yeah, that's my number one flavor, no matter what. Going back to being 6 at the Baskin Robbins, it's always been mint chip for me.
All right.
Great. Yeah, this is so anti my personality, but my favorite flavor is actually vanilla.
It's delicious.
And then covered in some really super dark espresso.
Totally. Yeah. Affogato style.
I go ice cream with on top of the brownie.
Yeah.
You need like a brownie ice cream. That's how you do it.
It's
all about the ratios, though. You got to get it just right.
Right.
Every bite has to have a little bit of both. Yeah.
And there's got to be a cherry on top of whatever it is.
That's correct.
Okay, I'll stop being silly now. Let's get down to business. I had to know. And look, you're both smiling, so
there we go.
We're in our group.
Ice broken.
So let's chat about the Arts and Letters Creative Company World Headquarters. This project transformed the 1930s Lucky Strike tobacco power plant. Another thing that jumped off the page. It's like, no way, I want to see what this is. Into a creative company headquarters. I've been around the block in this industry a few thousand times, so I know how challenging a transformation like that can be. What made the client choose to go this route instead of just having a new building designed?
They were looking at both. They were in one area of town. They wanted to be in, they were just kind of looking all over the city, but they wanted to be in the city around interesting people. This is an ad agency basically. So it's a bunch of creative people who like cities and things like that. So obviously in a city, you probably have less options to build, but we were finding some spaces and starting to do some planning about building it. I think it was just trying to gain control of various sites, and we were scrambling all around. And then one day, I think they walked into that building, fell in love with it, signed the lease, and it was off. So I think it really was probably just the power of the space that just sold them on it, and they had to go. And you know that, and I know all the problems that it's going to solve. I think they did not until after this. They might have a different opinion. I think it all worked out, and they'd probably do the same thing. But they would at least go in with maybe their eyes a little more wide open.
I would love to see. I'm looking. The reason I keep looking off to the side is because I have pictures of your building open in front of me, and I would love to see what this looked like before you started. I don't think I have one of those pictures, but it's gorgeous. And I can see how it. But because I'm not very good at visualizing the finished product, and so it probably would be very hard for me to walk into that 1930s building and see what it could be.
Well, I mean, in some ways, this one was one of those ones where we wanted to do not to say do as little as possible, but almost like really try not to mess it up. I think that's when you go into, we've done a number of historic projects and especially when you go into these big, beautiful buildings, you really don't want to screw it up. So you really want to make your thing highlight that, it becomes less about you needing to make something incredible instead of making, you need to make something that highlights and makes the whole thing incredible together, but you don't have to make your thing shine as much.
Well, you did a fantastic job of that.
Thanks.
It's definitely fair to say also, Cherise, that one of our motivating factors there, as Danny mentioned, was to not mess up this amazing shell of a building with these giant old windows and this kind of massive double and triple height space, and being really quiet, letting our architecture be a kind of quiet presence within this amazing shell was kind of key. So it led to a bunch of other decisions and kinds of decisions throughout the design process that hopefully you can see the result of that, but do kind of play out. Like, don't mess up this amazing experience on the river with, these incredible views that are now afforded, even though, the industry of that place has sort of gone. But its location on the river, which used to be really helpful, now makes for kind of an amazing space where you get broad vistas in a town that otherwise doesn't really have them. You get all this daylight coming through these big windows, which is great for workers and collaboration and all that stuff.
I'd work there. I mean,
we would work there.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not, because I work from home now and I really like working from home, but it is a fantastic space. And that was a perfect lead in to the next question. Tell me about the design vision for this building. What was the plan? When you walked in, you talked to your clients, you looked at this space. Where did your brains go from there?
There's probably a little bit of a backstory to their journey into it. So I'll try to be quick. But when we started talking to them probably a year and a half before we ended up starting this design process. And it was, they had called us in and they were probably 20 something people in an office that was really nice. It was pretty nice, but they were like, we want to change the space up. We need a few more desks. We want to make it a little cooler, all that sort of stuff. And so we kind of talked to them. We said, hey, we'll do it this way. And they kind of disappeared for 6 months and we hadn't heard from them. So we were like, oh, well, I guess they're not going to do it. And then they came back and we're like, okay, actually, we now have 45 people. We're bursting at the seams. We can't be in this office anymore. So now we need to find a new one. So that's when we started looking around for various places and started helping them with planning. Probably by the time we got to do this project, they were at 60 or so people when this was planned to be 120 people. By the time we put it in, they were probably at 160 to 180 people. They're probably 300 now. So they ended up keeping all of their spaces. So they kept the old space. They kept the space they overflowed in while they built this one, and they've kept that one. So that's sort of part of it. So going in there, it was really about, again, it was this huge space. You walk in, it's really interesting space because you could see the whole thing at the time. But it really wasn't enough to fit all the desks that they wanted. And again, the way that they wanted to work was less of let's just fit 1 million desks in the space. And it was more like everyone had a desk, but also places to meet. So, they really had an idea about a collaborative workspace that was, that you were always able to meet in groups of 2 and groups of 4 and groups of 10, or by yourself at the desk, or a little code by yourself. So we just had to create a lot more space. So that's part of what we ended up doing there, was making these volumes where we could inhabit underneath them and inhabit up above them, and sort of end up, just creating enough square footage that we could fit all of this program in there.
And they also have a fairly unique set of, maybe it's not unique in their world, but in ours, set of work types. Because they're a creative company, they obviously need to be in groups of creative people chatting and collaborating and coming up with ideas and doing sort of workshopping that a lot of us designers understand pretty well. But then they also do a lot of their own production. So they need to go off and have, Photoshop space, computer space, dark space, doing their own video recordings, doing their own audio recordings. So there's something interesting about the building, which is harder to capture in the photography. There's kind of this amazing undercroft of concrete, all these concrete floors that used to support these really big machines, have these spaces underneath that, create smaller, darker, more kind of individual space for focus and doing some of that other work that they do. So the variety in the space is really one of its key strengths, is that it has these spaces for a certain kind of work, then a space for another kind of work. Then, as Danny mentioned, we added these 2s and 4s and 6s and 10s and ways to really gather in a bunch of different forms of teams throughout. But it's it goes from the light all the way down to the dark within the building, in the same building. That's a difficult thing to do in a new build without it being sort of awkward or clunky or forced. This building sort of presented itself to them as a really good fit for their program.
Yeah, and we had kind of a big overarching metaphor for it that we were sort of talking about, kind of it as a city. So the idea was that if we thought of it as a city and everyone's desk is their home, then we'd need to make little parks and, little different types of places to be. So I think the idea was we'd have these little teeny parks and big parks and stuff like that. And, metaphors in architecture only take you so far. So you have to stop talking about them pretty quickly. But, it sort of helped to, because they didn't really come, a lot of times a client will come with a program that is like, we need this many desks and this many desks mean this many, we had to kind of create it from scratch. And there was a little bit of like, how much do you want? They were asking us as much as we were asking them, what should we do here? And I think we were trying to help them be like, okay, we might need 1 more of those and 2 less of those. And, really, I think more we were just pitching stuff to them for them to digest it and give it back. Cause I think it was probably more, they did figure it out after a time, but again, they didn't know how to make a building for 160 people either. So
I think that's actually,
sorry, Cherise.
Go ahead.
This is actually a great place for one of my favorite kind of sayings from Arts and Letters. One of their slogans is, we don't know what we're doing, but we've done it 1,000 times. And which is so perfect for architecture because, you never know what the problem is. You never know what the envelope might be in a case like this. You never know really what the solution is when you start. But if you've done it enough times, you know the questions to ask and you know how to get to a solution or a set of solutions. So literally that's like my mantra. I love that they say it and they put it on the wall and it's their poster, that it means a lot to us now too.
Well, I'm going to be stealing it as well because before you even kept going with that, you just said the quote. I was like, that's architecture.
Yeah.
That's spec writing too.
That's right.
So that was a great lead into the next question. Let's start digging into a little bit more detail. Let's start with a broader description of the actual spaces in this building and how you transformed what was there. Like I'm at the picture I happen to have open at the moment. I see one almost kind of like boxed in office. And then I see stairs going up to these big, long conference tables, which by the way, I think is really badass. I'm going to get in trouble today. And wood and what you talked that they needed a lot of different types of spaces, which I think is also the perfect example of relationships in architecture and why people need an architect. I know what I need to do in this building, but I don't know what I need to do to have the space to do it. Mm-hmm. So tell me about, in more specific detail, the different types of spaces in this building.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we Adam talked about it a little bit, but really, it's most of the, let's say 2/3 of the bodies are probably creatives or at least in support of the creatives. And so they're sort of in the open workspace. So there's probably just a lot of those people. And again, the thought was that they'd have a desk, but that they wouldn't always be at the desk. That was like a place to drop your bag more than it was probably to sit there and work all day. Although some people like doing it that way, but I think they were finding that a lot of their people like to sort of go off. It's almost like a coffee shop or like a hotel lobby, I think is the way you wanted to think of it. So it was almost like putting all these desks in like a big overarching space that allowed you to then have these little meetings of 2s and 4s. So we made little teeny nooks that are literally one per, it's a door, it's a small room with a comfortable chair and a table, and that's it. And that's a room. And then there's a room that has slightly bigger, so it could have 2 comfortable chairs and a table, so 2 people could sit there and talk. And then there's another one that could be 3 and 4 and 10. And then there's a big giant conference table that has 30 people in it. So I think it's just, again, I think them not knowing what they'll need in the future was just like, let's make sure we have a little bit of everything, and enough of it that we can, come into that space and everyone will feel comfortable there, and you're not fighting over the conference rooms. I think that was a big deal, was to not have to like make your work so regimented as to be like, well, I'd like to talk to you, but we don't have the room until 3:30, so let's wait. I think there was a real idea of whenever the moment strikes, you need to be ready to, find a quiet place and talk about it. And
there's also the element of, Danny and I do with the office do hotel projects and museum type projects and cultural projects. Any space for a collective act, there's got to be a front door that matters. They have people who are in the public who come here who don't necessarily need to go all the way to the back of the building. So the process of creating an entry that is meaningful in an existing shell that wasn't really about that, creating a powerful kind of lobby and front desk experience that was going to communicate what they were about, moving through the space, giving them collective spaces to gather. There's the big amphitheater space that is fairly cliche now in most contemporary office spaces, but it really works. And they have giant presentations to 200 people at a time. And they're ready for that. And their gatherings, when they finally did get everybody back into the office, those moments were really critical, that they could gather up, give a message, or, have a conversation all at once. So creating that kind of variety of experiences, but pathways in, big kitchen, big commissary kind of space, big offices when they need them, as Danny mentioned, big lounges when they need them, as the sort of contemporary office always is good at including. But it's kind of a variety of those things and a pathway in, both for the person who works there and always has done, and the person who's coming just to visit and say hello or have an important meeting or whatever the case is.
So I'm famous for going down rabbit holes, in case I didn't warn you. I'm looking at this building and these soaring ceilings. How's the noise in there? Did you guys do anything to mitigate acoustics? I mean, you can get such a huge echo in a space like this. Just curious.
It wasn't as bad as you'd think. I think just because there's a lot of stuff up there. I mean, I don't know if anyone from Arts and Letters is going to be listening to this and screaming. No, it's terrible, but
it's horrible.
We certainly thought about it and we did certain things. There isn't a lot to do. I think because it's so broken up. If it were like a big cube, I think it would be really bad. I think it's a little broken up, so it's not overly loud. I imagine if you had a big party there, it would get extra loud. But the spaces that we created inside the boxes have acoustic, we put acoustic ceilings in and things like that, so that those spaces become very quiet and, they have a lot of insulation, so that there is a place to go away. And again, it's broken up. So there's sort of like the big giant space. That's maybe the loudest space. There's a second sort of double height space that is there. And then if you go downstairs, it gets a little smaller and smaller. So I think you can sort of escape to the level of noise you're willing to deal with. But yeah, it is an old brick and steel building, so there's a certain amount of, we didn't want to go in there and hang a bunch of acoustic panels in the ceiling or something like that, just because it didn't seem worth it. And I didn't think they needed it, but I think that was one of those ones we sort of thought, let's get you in there. If it's a huge problem, there are solutions. So far, it hadn't been a huge problem.
So these old buildings are often fraught with hidden existing conditions and design challenges because they're old and we've learned so much along the way. From a design standpoint, what was the most challenging? We love the challenging questions because you learn so much from the challenges. What was the most challenging to accomplish in what you were trying to do with this space? Teach us something.
I mean, probably the biggest one was, those voluminous spaces was really just the HVAC, like trying to keep it hot and cold. Like the people who had been in that building prior to, certainly complained about hot and cold swings. You could feel it in the building. If you're on the ground, it feels like something. And then you would go to the top mezzanine and it would be 20 degrees hotter, more or less. And, and when it was, those are all single pane steel windows, the walls are all just solid masonry. So, when it's cold, those things are just radiating cold at you. So solving that, we knew we were never going to solve that problem. Like that's sort of the trade-off you make in a big old building is we're not going to replace those windows. They're awesome. We just wouldn't want to in some ways. So the big trick that we did, which wasn't too difficult, but because it's a pretty conventional system, blowing air, but we put those big ass fans in the ceiling. And that was just meant to like de-stratify the air. And really it just breaks it up and it kind of keeps the top and bottom, instead of being 20 degrees apart, they're 5 to 10 degrees apart, 5 degrees apart. So there's still certainly an amount of, in the middle of the summer, when the sun's shining through the window and you're up on that mezzanine, it's probably a little hot. And, but I think it's been pretty comfortable. It's probably as comfortable as my current office at any rate.
And it is safe to say that the education of the client on something like that is really important when you're going into a building like this, where we know we're not getting, a consistent floor plate, we're not getting consistent solar exposure, we don't have the ability to create a really tight envelope. So we have to make sure, this is not a museum environment with a flat humidity and a flat temperature. It's absolutely the opposite. But making sure that the client, the owner, the user understands that going in, and that there are a lot of different ways to mediate. We have shades that are operable that can block sunlight. We have windows that open that we can let in fresh air when it's the right thing to do. Making sure that everyone understands what the challenges are with a building like that before we get into the design or before everyone moves in is really important. We can't solve for all of those problems perfectly like we could maybe in a different environment, but also a sort of non-American version of the world, which says it doesn't need to be perfect all the time. And our bodies are creatures of nature, and we can stand to get a little hot and we can stand to get a little cold, and that's kind of fine. And Virginia is a great place because it never gets really cold. It gets pretty hot, but it's sort of a nice temperate climate. It might be really difficult to be in a building like that if it were in New York State or if it were in Miami. But in Virginia, it's kind of good. They get variety, and it's manageable variety, I think, in the climate.
Yeah, and programmatically, again, we talked about sort of the ability, the nomadic version of the people in the place, but you can kind of just go to the place that you're comfortable whenever you need to. So that was probably the HVAC was probably the biggest challenge, because the architecture, the thing, we probably weren't digging too deep into the envelope to find all the problems. It was one of the tricks of, again, not trying to alter the skin too much, but just try to build things with it, build pieces of furniture more or less inside of it helped. But the one fun story was like when we first got in there and we started digging around looking for, to do the existing conditions. And at some point we go into some closet and there's a clear PVC pipe running down into a trash can that's that's almost completely full of water. And we dug into that and realized that there was a leak, and that leak was coming in, and their solution was to collect the water, put it in the trash can. You just have to empty it every so often. So that was the beginning. I think we fixed that leak. So we moved it one. I think there's probably another leak popped up it's like a little bit like the Dutch boy in the dam. Like every time you plugged a leak, something else popped up. But
problem-solving skills.
Yeah.
Exactly. Cherise, there's also the element that I think we always kind of bring to a project, and in a project like this, it makes even more sense. We're not trying to do very complicated things, almost ever. I think we like the idea that what we're adding to a project is clarification and simplicity and, achievability. And so in a climate like this, where you're going to go into this building you know you're going to find things that are going to throw you off. You know you're trying to prepare for budgets, and you're trying to, have the reality of what you're undertaking in a space like that. You know it's coming. And so we like to be able to mitigate some of that by, proposing simple solutions to the problem rather than very complicated, high touch materiality in a space like this is not appropriate. All of the things that could get us off track down the road, or don't give us any wiggle room to get out of a design solution. That helps in a job like this. And it's kind of what we do in most of our projects, is try to keep it simple and achievable. And so in a place like this, there were challenges, there were things that came up and you're like, oh man, nothing we can do about it. We have to fix it. Client, builder, whomever, we have to get through this problem by fixing it. Can't ignore it. But let's hope that the additions and the work that we're adding are not going to, also blow up the ship in the other direction.
I'm a fan of a more minimalist, simple type of style in everything in my life. Can't stand clutter. Not usually super fond of architecture that's really busy, with the exception of really cool old churches.
Yeah,
I love really cool old churches. You gotta
love them.
Oh, love them. I went to a really bizarre one in Boston last week. But I think that sometimes we run into the danger in this business of over designing in spaces where you really shouldn't. And I think that's a good question every architect should ask themselves before they start a project is, where do I really need to go here? Is this really a champagne taste on a beer budget kind of situation?
Yep.
And like Adam was saying, even if you could afford it going in, if it doesn't leave you any wiggle room when something goes wrong, because that's always the thing. If you built something that's so tight, especially in an existing building, and then, oh no, this actually has to move 2 feet that way, and if that blows up the entire plan and you have to redesign it, like that's you haven't done your job right. You have to like account for at least, I think architecture, at least I feel like in my tenure doing architecture for a number of years, it's like, it really is just looking and trying to figure out what the worst thing that could possibly happen all the time, and then just trying to mitigate and not to have to deal with that later. So if I can solve it now so that I don't have to deal with something terrible later, I'm going to figure that out as best I can.
Well, something super highly designed would not have worked in this space. I'm looking at a different picture now, and I'm not exactly sure what these big concrete things are under the floor.
They were holding up the big machinery in the original power plant.
They're super cool, but you're not going to go put in all this ornate woodwork or whatever. It would totally ruin everything that's great about the space.
Yeah.
Can you, and maybe you've already covered this, maybe not. Can you tell me about a unique space in this building that required you to learn something new that you didn't already know? You had to go do some research in order to make it happen.
I don't really know. I don't think so. Again, we were pretty clean. Again, our spaces were pretty, we built basically furniture and put it in there, and nothing that we made was overly crazy or complicated. So I don't know that I ever had to go pull out the book and try to figure something out specifically. I might be underselling it. There's probably something that I've blocked out.
There is, this is the advantage of being an architect and doing creative company workspace, is that we are already, in search of a variety of different spaces as architects. We have, different kind of methods, different sort of people, different sort of brains that work in different ways and need to combine in different ways. So, this just felt like a great exercise for us to do all the things that we think are important in our own offices and in all the spaces we've worked in before. What have been the limitations, and how can we try to maximize this space for a bunch of different uses? But they don't do anything, they don't have technical components to most of these spaces. They have, sound and light requirements in some of their programs, but those things aren't that difficult to overcome. A recording studio looks sort of like this. A digital production studio looks sort of like this. In the museum world, you sometimes tackle some very specific art installations or very specific, environmental controls on a piece of or a type of art. But this was, people taking care of people and making sure they could work. So it wasn't specifically complicated on a space by space basis.
So I know you already said you didn't do much, if anything, to the exterior of the building. Was there anything that was a part of your project that you did to? I work for an enclosure consultant now, so I'm a little more interested in the building enclosure than I used to be. Was there anything you did have to do to the enclosure, or is there anything you did with this site that you'd like to share with us?
I mean, again, not really. We tried to stay out of the outside, again, aside from fixing a few leaks and pushing some water away from the building that was flowing into the building, so we jumped up there with some shovels and dug it out. But not really. Again, it was the outside of the building wasn't really in the scope of anything we were trying to consider. And I don't know that we wanted to get out there. There was occasionally a thought of getting up on the roof or doing some things like that, and I think in the end it just proved to be probably more than they wanted to take on.
The conference room in the smokestack would have been one of the amazing projects.
That wasn't outside, but it would. Yeah, there was one place we almost had a conference room inside of one of the smokestacks, and I think that was one of those. We poked a hole. Basically stuck your head in and was just like, nope, patch it back up. We're not going to talk about it anymore.
That's not going to work. Don't tell the client.
I did think of one thing that we sort of learned in the process of this. So there is an elevator that takes you from the ground level to the second level. And then we have a mezzanine that is, not accessible. And we were doing all sorts of research because we were going to put in a lift to make everything accessible. And I think within the code, there's a certain amount of square footage that you can have that isn't accessible. And that's why when we wanted to try to go to the roof, we were sort of tripped up by that. So once we did that, we would have had to put the lift in. And then I think in the end, we didn't want to have to do that. So, or no, actually, this was an interesting thing about the lift. So we could have put the lift. They wanted to put it in. But in a lift, if you look at the manufacturer's ability, they can make a lift that goes 24 feet, I think, something like that. But it's not allowed in the US. I think in Canada you can, but in the US you can only go 12 feet with a lift. So it was an interesting thing I learned there, was just that for some reason in the US, lifts are not allowed. Once you do that, you're an elevator, and then you need pit, and you need all the sorts of things you need with an elevator. So I'll have to, I was unable to dig in and find why that is, but as with much in the US law, it's maybe not worth digging.
I probably get myself fried for this one, but we tend to sometimes lag behind some other countries
I think that's
in progressing to, just like the whole mass timber thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Been doing that over in Europe for a very long time. And we're just now kind of, maybe we should get on board this train. We can let them make the mistakes first too, I suppose, but all in how you want to look at it. Can you tell me about some of the materials you used? I would imagine that you had to be really thoughtful about material selection so that it would work in this space. Any particular materials that you'd like to share, or did you, I'm looking at all this wood in the ceiling and the brick. Did you do any cleaning or coating or refinishing of that, or was it really just assuming you painted all these beams? Talk to me about some of what you ended up with in finishes inside this building.
Yeah, probably for the skin of the building, we, obviously did some cleaning, did a little bit of, just to make it right. And the metal was a little bit all over. So there were certain things that were black, certain, the ducts were silver, all the things. And I think we sort of made the call that, basically that thing should be brick and black. And, so all that infrastructure would kind of go away and again, make the building pop a little more so that and then with the things that we built, again, we were trying to be pretty quiet and also pretty simple about them. So I don't know that we picked anything that's I think the wood is poplar, but we painted it because we didn't want to have to, we wanted to make it a pretty quick process and didn't want to have to futz over, stained wood, which might just sort of blow things up a little bit and also be a little louder. It's really just drywall mostly in the project, and pretty, again, the stuff we built was trying to be pretty clean, and then again trying to clean up the shell of the building to highlight the things that we think should be highlighted and let the other things recede to the background.
And that's a pretty general kind of approach that we take. Again, we talked about how doing the simple thing in a complicated space is usually going to be the right thing to do. And so, do we have access to these materials? Do we have access to subs and, future subs who are going to be able to take care of this building? Is this a really precious building or not? And so we definitely err on the side of less precious. And, the result is you still get to make beautiful forms. You still get to have a really quiet experience. You still get to amplify what the shell is about. But do you need a cantilevered piece of titanium to do that? Probably not. Do you need custom glass to do these things? Generally not. So I think we try to work with really available skills and materials and try to make the most compelling architecture with those pieces rather than feel like we have to go develop a custom detail or a custom system or, a set of fabrications that are really complicated and hard to achieve. We like to be able to execute the things that we're designing and not trip ourselves up by overdoing it.
Yeah, I have to say that, I love the fact that your simplicity has resulted in such an outstanding looking space. Like one of my pet peeves in these older buildings where it has all these exposed things is that in an effort, sometimes I think, not in every building, sometimes it looks good, but they want to leave it as it was. And certain things, that looks great. And other things, it looks like just a hot mess up in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And my gut tells me that prior to you painting all of this black to make it pop, which it does, it was a hot mess up in the ceiling. Talking about the different spaces and everything. And I think one of the lessons I'm really loving about this podcast today is the whole KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid.
Absolutely.
We don't always have to do ridiculous things to achieve something that is a really beautiful space. And we forget that on a daily basis in this industry.
Most of the time. Yeah. And, we're maybe underselling our effort a little bit. What you're recognizing that there's kind of a color coding of what was there, what was not the shell, but what was in the space versus what we added. That we obviously, white is beautiful and crisp and easy to make so. And so the contrast, we did add some of that, but the ethic of the project is still one of, KISS. Absolutely.
White is the vanilla of paints. Right?
It's our favorite ice cream flavor of sheetrock.
You notice I didn't say anything about the white. I didn't think I could do vanilla and white in one episode. Yeah. But my reaction is, well, to probably everything in my life, but also to architectures. I'm not an architect. And so my reaction to this is purely an emotional reaction to any space that I'm in. How does it make me feel? What is my reaction to that space? Does it look spaces that are too busy kind of stress me out a little bit. I don't feel comfortable and relaxed. I like to be, kind of zen when I can get there.
Yeah.
And so I should be your best critic, right? I'm the person that's going to walk in and say, and not know a thing of what I'm talking about when it comes to design.
Yeah. There's also the beauty of a building like that is it did exist in an era where natural light was really important. And so for to be a contemporary worker in that space, you can see trees, you can see daylight, you see the sun move, you see the seasons change from your desk. And so the perch that you have, and again, back to staying out of the way of what was interesting about this building, we were able to create a bunch of workspaces that actually take in daylight, have fresh air, have access to outdoors, and have the movement of the light. There's these massive skylights on both wings of the building that change the light from minute to minute. And so all of those things were kind of baked in, and we were able to take advantage of them, not screw them up. Don't put shades in every skylight. Don't have an attitude where you want to push all of that stuff out, but let it activate the space. And it really does. I mean, the space is as dynamic a kind of natural environment as you could ever get in. It's amazing.
I mean, going back to a little bit what you're saying about keeping it simple and that being sometimes the best way to go. It's also like we only have a limited amount of ability, effort, time, whatever to do our work. And so the less moves you can make, the more you can focus on doing those things correctly. Like if you make the crumpled piece of paper and whatever, but you only have 4 months to design it, like you're not going to figure out all the ways that those things connect. You can do it if you have the extended period of time and you can solve all the problems. But we find that this was a quick project. Like, they found the space and they want to be in it tomorrow. So to some extent, you have to like make decisions, decide what matters, solve that problem really well, and then kind of see, don't make problems you can't solve, I guess is
you're sounding a little old school there.
Yeah. I'm getting older. Yeah. As it turns out.
I hate to admit this, but there in my first office, we had one computer in the office that came from Radio Shack, Tandy,
Nice.
Tandy computer, and AutoCAD was this newfangled thing that they weren't ready to try yet, and they were still drawing on paper or on Mylar, and there's something to be said for doing it right the first time. Because we don't ever put pencils down anymore, with the technology and that's great. We have all kinds of, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm a total technology fan, but we've lost sight of, number one, keeping track of our budgets and working efficiently. And no, you don't have to over detail every single little thing in the building just because you can. I don't know that some of those boundaries that drawing on paper used to just naturally give you, measure twice, cut once. I don't know that, I feel like we're missing something by losing a lot of those boundaries and not really staying with the purity of the form always.
I think we're still on the learning curve of it, because I think there's obviously all the benefits it brings, and I think we're still just not to the place where we understand the strengths and weaknesses of the tool. I mean, Adam and I are older and are less adept at the tools that we're using now, and so we have a staff.
I do know how to draft with a 2mm lead.
Right. I know how to do that too. Like sadly that's how we do. But it is the thing where we're directing the work, and we expect it to happen the way that our process worked, and the new process is a little different than the way our process was. So it's just sort of a learning curve where we think it's easy to do this thing, and someone's like, "That's not easy. That's actually like the other thing that you think is hard is easy, and the thing that you think is easy is hard." And so, there's a lot of learning on both sides of that equation. But
there definitely is. I mean, I'm a spec writer, and I work in a database-driven spec writing program. And I don't know how many times somebody has asked me, and I've been working in this program for 15 years, somebody will come to me and say, "Oh, you could just push a button and make this magically appear, right?"
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. I always threaten that I'm going to make everybody I write specs for write one spec.
Yeah, just the one.
Yeah, and you will totally change how you work with me. Some of our best lessons learned, I think our best lessons learned, come during construction, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Is what I designed and what I drew actually coming together the way that we envisioned it? Were there any challenges during the construction phase of this project besides the pipe spitting water in through the wall? Which I think that's great. But any challenges that came up during construction that caused you to pivot or maybe a change of decision or anything like that?
I mean, really the challenge was it was less where you'd expect to look than what Danny mentioned, that it was a growing company and the pace of their growth was, getting ahead of our ability to design this space properly. So really, halfway through, we're designing it for 50 more people, 60 more people, 70 more people during construction. And so there was the element there where, it was less about the building and those challenges, the usual thing that we feel like we're capable of dealing with. And it was more kind of from the program and design side, we're almost done with this job. Can we be flexible and nimble and still create, more space, allow more people in the room, and kind of deal with it? Don't lose the architecture that's been designed and had been kind of conceptualized with the owners, but still make that work. So that was a real challenge. That happened, more or less the last couple months of the job, and we had to jump on that and make it work. But we did.
And they're a creative company, and they understand the creative process, but they're also a creative company that's working in a medium that is a lot quicker than architecture. Is a very, very slow process. You draw it, everything just takes years. And I think, they understand that, but also there's just like, well, why don't we just move that thing over there and do this? And it's like, it all conceptually makes sense, but instead of it being, a video that you're editing or let's reshoot that scene, it's like, we need to get the thing to the contractor so we can get it to the subcontractor so we can get it to the guy. And then that guy's going to tell you, it's going to go back up the chain, tell him how much it costs, and it's going to go back down the chain. And then he's going to say, okay, I can get to it in 3 weeks. And then there's something else that's some other sub that then you have to go back up and down the chain for that. So it's just this, as you've done it a couple of times, you realize it's just a slow thing. So when someone wants it to be quick, it's hard. And you can do it, but it just takes, real, you just have to stay on top of everyone.
I love that was your answer, because usually when I have that question in one of my podcasts with a guest, the answer is about the design. Oh, we ripped open this wall and found this and we had to redesign this, or the floor was about to cave in, or things like that. I love, because nobody ever talks about programming changes during construction, which are a real pain in the rear end. On any project, you've got things designed. It does take time to go back and forth through that whole food chain of communication. And nobody ever talks about that. So tell me, what did you do as these changes started happening? It's natural. The company's growing. What did you do from your original design to where you ended up to accommodate some of that growth?
It was a lot of just like plugging in, trying to find places for more desks, getting rid of walls, moving walls, things like that. And just trying, trying to keep the integrity of what we had, trying not to blow it up, and still just seeing if we could find space for things, which we were able to do. It's just sort of like, okay, well, this space that was this is now going to take on a few more of these types of uses. And again, the client was awesome. They're an incredibly creative and thoughtful and, understanding client. So they were just sort of asking the questions. So we're running it to the ground. The contractor was great as well. So, we were able to sort of just we were able to do it pretty quickly, but it was not easy, I guess. It seems like it should be easy, and it, maybe even looks easy, but it's not, because you just have to, have all those partnerships going all at once and everyone being willing to work with each other. Because I think we could blow, if when the client does that, the architect can blow it up and make it a difficult thing to do. And then the contractor could blow it up and make it a difficult thing to do if they didn't want to do it. But I think that's also the nature of keeping good relationships with, having an owner that is a great, they're so great that they make you want to do things for them and not make it hard for them. And then the contractor, keeping a good relationship with them and them being willing to help and not being obstructionist about it. So, yeah.
Well, I don't think, one of the questions I ask people sometimes is, what do you think we could do better in this industry? And oftentimes I've quit asking it as often because I keep getting the same answer: better communication, better relationships. It really is, especially if you've got, the three powers that be, the architect, the contractor, and the owner, on the same page and working well together. Those problems are nowhere near as big as they could be.
Yep.
If you have that, and you can set that up you can set that attitude and that vibe from day one if you choose to take the time to do it.
Absolutely.
And everything goes better for everybody, but yet we have so many of us that still don't. They want to fight. No, we want to fight. We want to be cranky.
And it's not even that they want to fight. Sometimes it's just that there is like this legal process. We're making legal documents and we're handing them over, and then everyone is, once you start, if you're unwilling to go outside of that process, or to talk outside of that process, again, you probably still need to follow the process to make sure all the legal documents still, are buttoned up at the end of the project. But everyone needs to be able to just understand what the other guy's trying to do, and then try to say that is a good thing to do and I will help you do it, or you really shouldn't do that. I advise against it.
Right. There's also just a flexibility of thought for us as designers. Like, we, as we mentioned, we try to keep it simple, but we also are prepared to think differently about the solution if it's no longer the solution, or if it's not solving the problem anymore, or if itself is becoming a problem because it's too specific. And so I think being able to be flexible and nimble as designers is really important. We don't want to set up this Rubik's Cube that's, so perfectly done that as soon as you move one thing over, the entire design is ruined. That's not smart as a business. It's not smart as to keep the process moving. But as designers, we want to create spaces that are flexible, and we want to be nimble of thought as we're doing it, so that we don't feel locked into a thing either. We know complications through design, through budgeting, through construction, through all of they all happen. And if we're so dialed in or locked into a design and our thinking, we can't imagine it being different, or somehow we're being affronted by the owner or the process or the builder. That's just sort of silly. And so we'd rather not even think that way from the beginning to the end. Just roll with it, and we will find solutions to these problems.
Yeah, the design is a solution to the problem, and if someone changes the problem, your solution might not be the solution to that problem. So you have to think that way. So you might fall in love with the thing you made and it looks perfect. And if they change the problem and that no longer solves the problem, you have to crumple it up and throw it in the trash and start over. You have to be willing to do that. That was beautiful. We made the thing. We solved now we have to solve a different problem. Let's move on. It's hard.
And we do, part of Danny's philosophy background is that he's very dialed into the logic of the thing. And so one of the, it is part of our process is there a logic here that we can defend and be happy about? There are a million aesthetic solutions and different ways to make a thing look one way or another. But is there a logic here that we believe in, that we can defend, that we can present to a client or a builder that makes sense and is, responding to the issues or the problem or whatever? Obviously, we care a lot that things are really beautiful, but there's a beauty in the sort of elegance of a thing, and there's also a beauty in the logic of the thing. And I think it matters to us a lot that these things do solve the problem, and there is a logic behind them, and that we can, get behind them, support them, believe in them. But when the logic needs to change, it's got to change, and we're ready for that too.
So in order for that to work, you have to be able to check the ego at the door, which is also something I've seen drastically changing in our industry in the time I've been in our industry. That, I am king or queen of the hill. I designed this, it's perfect, and you can't change a thing because it's perfect. That I might have seen earlier in my career, I see less and less and less of. More collaborative, more flexible.
Absolutely.
More humble. And I think we need that as well.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why we like our name to be Architecture Firm and not MacNelly Ruffin or Ruffin MacNelly, who knows which.
Probably Ruffin.
No. Yeah, right. but it is because it's fairly anonymous. It's not a name on the door. It's not an ego. It's anyone, the people working for us are as responsible for all the things we do as us, and probably more so. Matt Pinion, we haven't even said his name.
Matt Pinion.
He led this job in an amazing way. So.
Sorry, Matt, I will make sure. I'm going to write down your name as soon as it's over, and I will make sure to tag you in the social media posts.
He's the greatest project architect, project manager, project killer, daily beast for us.
Oh, daily beast. Okay. I love your firm name, and everything that you guys have said out loud during this interview reflects that the simplicity and the lack of ego and the humbleness of the name, and we're here to be an architecture firm. That name, the name of your firm has become more meaningful to me now after speaking to the two of you. So what can we look forward to from Architecture Firm going forward? What are you guys working on now? And what can I call you about later?
So we do have a variety of typologies. Fortunately, we're lucky enough to do a handful of different kinds of things. Hotel projects, one in New York, one in West Virginia. There are cultural projects that we're working on, single family and multifamily projects that we're doing. We really enjoy projects that have a cultural connection, and either that's coming from the client or it's in a position, within an urban environment, or that we can bring a cultural connection to any of these project types. So we've been fortunate so far that a lot of our projects do have that. A company like Arts and Letters is one of the perfect examples where it's not merely an office space, but it's really kind of a part of the larger culture, and even the work that they do is part of the culture. They are out in space doing things that you've probably seen on television, and that most of the people would have also seen. So it's really great for us to be kind of part of a conversation that's like that through different kinds of architecture.
So I usually end with a couple of questions totally unrelated to your project. And if I could get my mouse on the right screen, I could tell you what they are. So I have two final questions. One is usually a broad industry question. And so what I'd like you to do is tell me about one notable thing that has happened at any point in your career that changed your perspective about design from that moment going forward.
I mean, we may jump back to the thing we were talking about before, where it's really about the kind of the 3D workspace, or like the way that once it became easy to visualize things. We came up obviously in an era where we were still hand drafting everything at school, but the 3D software was coming out, and so we were starting to render, but they were all terrible, and they took 2 hours. They took 2 days to do, so no one did it. But I guess as that's progressed, and now it's part of almost the tool that we're using to make drawings, it can also make the 3D renderings, and it's Inkscape and all those things. And it's really pretty exciting. Like we were saying before, I don't think we all understand how the tool works well enough, and especially in the context of how to make a good drawing set. Because I think the thing that fools you into is you end up designing your building in 3D and making this thing, which you almost figure everything out, but then you don't relay how to build it to the person who has to build it as effectively. So like I said, that's definitely changed the way I think about everything, and I don't know if I've figured it out yet. So.
How about you, Adam?
I mean, it's sort of, as we think about being a practice now, instead of just individual architects, the tools that we have at our disposal, to Danny's point, it really has changed the way we worked. I mean, when we started the office, we were still in a 2D environment, even though it was computer based. Now to be in this very rapid kind of iteration with tools that actually create very simply and quickly relatable imagery that our clients can understand. Everything that we're doing all the time, like within the studio, we kind of know what we're doing. Danny and I can grunt at each other, and we know what we need about that space and how it ought to look. But communicating quickly to clients, and obviously, we've come up in very high design background offices. The communication of the work was as much a problem or as much a challenge as the development of the work. And it's nice that some of that has kind of moved toward us, where the doing the design work and being able to communicate it effectively is kind of the same process. It lets us be as iterative as we ever were, but lets us find efficiencies in the way we work and not have to grind everybody up into paste and be the egotistical architect who expects everyone to work till midnight all the time and suffer for their art. We run a business, and so it's nice to be able to kind of find efficiencies where we can, both in our design thought and ethics, but in the tools, and be able to kind of be more expeditious in the way we make architecture too.
I'm kind of an efficiency freak. It is a really, really nice way of putting it. And I don't think pretty much for my entire career that we have been a terribly efficient business.
Correct.
In the way that we do all kinds of things, not just design, but all kinds of things in running our firms. And I really do think there needs to be more of a focus on that. It just, people talk all the time about architects aren't necessarily business people. They went to school to design, and they don't care about all the hard math and, that kind of stuff. But one of my arguments to that, I don't want to put people in a box and make them, give them boundaries. My argument to that is, if you give them boundaries in the area where it makes sense, if you have an efficient process, we're all going to do this the same way. It creates all that much more time for you to do the part that you actually went to school to do. So yeah, I love having that. I love having that debate with all kinds of people. Let me tell you why it's better to be efficient.
You're right.
Okay, final question. Everybody gets this question on the podcast because I'm a big marshmallow at heart. So I have to have a marshmallow question in here. As human beings, we all hope that our actions in this life will in some way make a difference for others, make the world a better place. And when I say the world, I mean your world. It doesn't have to be the whole world. For me, I call that mission my personal world domination statement. What am I going to do in my world in the time that I have to make a difference for others or a difference in my environment? So my question for you, easy, light question, personal or professional, how do you as an individual hope to make an impact on the world? What is your personal world domination statement?
Mostly I don't want to dominate the world. It's exhausting. But yeah, I suppose just personally, I'm trying to think if I have a real statement, but I guess it's just sort of be kind, I guess, and maybe just, in that way, be a good friend, good father, good husband, good business partner, good boss, to some extent. And, I think, I don't know, that's maybe a little punty, not totally answering it, but
I'll pick up the punt though, because I think, we do talk about this a lot, and it sort of gets back to what we hinted at in the last question. But, we run a practice that's made of people who are amazing architects who have full lives and have their own interests and, their own families and all of these other things. It's one of the really great things about being in this position is that, obviously making architecture affect people. We get to make beautiful buildings, and people get to look at those buildings as our chief kind of output. But running a practice of architects who we care about, who we want to teach what we know, who we want to be, as experienced and deeply architectural as possible. We want them to be professionals. We want them to understand the ins and outs of the business, but we want to provide a platform for them to all get really good at this and maybe go open their own practices or affect people in the built environment or within the professional. And we get to also make the choice that our practice can be run efficiently, run respectfully, run ethically. We don't hire a lot of free interns. We don't do, a lot of the things that you just shouldn't be doing as a professional. We don't do them, and we make a point of saying that we don't do them so that we can be held accountable by our team. That should be normal. It shouldn't be, the process of making architecture shouldn't be so hard for everyone involved in the making of it. It's why we don't have the ego. It's why we don't try to be Adam or Danny. It's why we really care about the team we have. And so we want to, maybe we're germinating, and this is how we dominate the world. But if we could turn the architecture practice into something, less ghoulish and egotistical and difficult, both by the way we think about it and by the way we, form a practice, that's how we'll dominate. That's what's going to happen. That's our statement.
So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's right.
I don't think that was punting at all. I have a T-shirt that says "Be a kind human."
Oh, there you go.
And I firmly believe that the things that make the most impact in our world are things we don't even think about as we're doing them. If you're a good human being, you just do something, you mentor somebody, or you teach somebody, or you give somebody a hand up, and you never think about it again until 20 years later, somebody drops you a card or an email saying, you have no idea how you impacted my life.
Right.
Just being a good human, I think, is how we really dominate this world.
We think of, we do think of the practice of architecture as being an optimistic act. You're trying to imagine some solution to a problem and thus make something better. That doesn't really matter what it is. And so, if we're all involved in an optimistic act and enjoying it, that's the best. If we can make this thing that we get to do, which we're really lucky to do, even better, even more educational for us, even more kind of connective than just crank out a beautiful piece of art every time out, and who cares who's miserable doing it. Feels like a better approach for us.
Well, I think it's a great approach for the future. And I will tell you, all the young professionals I do mentor and teach are going to be standing there with pom-poms cheering about that answer. Because that's where the biggest complaint is our younger people coming up. And that we're not, that world that you were brought up in, we're not going to work in that. We're not going to work that way. And we want to have a voice. And I think I raised my kids differently than this world I came up in, to have a voice and to be respected and to respect others and do good things, and be a kind human.
Yeah.
So the firms that figure that out are the ones that are going to be running the day going forward, because there's a whole mess, and I mean mess in a positive way, of younger professionals in these huge generations coming behind us. And I think we have a responsibility to give them a better world than we had.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether it's work or otherwise. Danny and Adam, this has been so much fun. I'm so glad that we were able to meet up and talk. I hope that you will come back and see me when you have another project interesting to talk about, because you guys are really fun to talk to. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cherise.